Hello, everyone. Welcome to our presentation, which is called Remote Spatial Investigations, Constructing the Virtual Map of Belgrade. My name is Schoonderbeek, and I'm here together with my dear colleague, Alexander Stanicic. The presentation will consist of 4 parts. The pre-pandemic setup of our studio. Second part is pandemic studio, the results of that studio, and then we have a small reflection on that studio. Let me start with the description of a pre-pandemic setup of our studio, our teaching. Architecture as a projective discipline is a projective discipline, meaning it tends to act in and on the world. Though reflexive in its evaluations and assessments, architecture aims to transform reality both spatially and materially. Architecture is also a practice that deals with the ordering of space. This ordering occurs in most cases through the determination of boundaries, thus defining and demarcating territories as well as smaller scale spaces as a decisive architectural act. The projective act of architecture can also be reversed, however. The emphasis on the analysis of spatial conditions emerging from or determined by boundaries in the contemporary city is in this context regarded as one of the guiding thematic principles for an architectural intervention proposal. This contextual ending of the architectural object is regarded as the very starting point or premises for an intervention proposal, and to understand the spatial and material conditions of reality, the field trip is considered of vital importance to students of architecture, as it allows for the gaining of insight into the specificities of locality. Our Borders and Territories program has a tradition of instigating dérives when going on field trips with students. When exploring the presence of contemporary border and territorial conditions, our program considers the physical and slow experience of the spatial context around these borders and territories important, but also appreciates the openness that is situated in the aimlessness of wandering through the city as a specific mode of inquiry. The intended purpose of these walks is to investigate and map all these hidden forces of with the immediacy as well as the precision, factuality, and tangibility of on the ground. The imagined trajectories through Belgrade, in this case, were based on our initial intent to allow the studio participants to be confronted with a great variety of spatial conditions in that city. The intention of the Borders and Territories Belgrade studio, therefore, was not to explore singularities, that is, infrastructure, post-conflict conditions, pollutions, what have you, but to investigate the overlapping or superimposition of such different spatial regimes.
However, with the current travel restrictions related to the COVID-19 virus in place, new educational circumstances had emerged in the early spring of 2020, bringing remote research methods to the fore. As a result, in situ investigations and related field trips had to be made from a distance, online and a little bit more haphazardly. The students were therefore invited to conduct virtual walks using digital means such as Google Earth and Google Street View to transverse locations in the urban fabric where conflicts and tensions have mounted. The idea was that Google Street View camera can replace the human eye and help students immerse completely into the urban reality of city they do not know and are not familiar with, making choices where to go and where to turn also intuitively by reading figurative road signs. Starting from the eye in the sky satellite view, our studio participants first intuitively selected the starting point of their walk. While navigating the Google Earth, each group was mapping the space using their own sets of criteria, guided by their own professional interests, while negotiating the things they spotted and considered relevant. In this exercise titled Walking of Virtual Derive Trajectories, students engaged into distant investigations of complex spatial relationships by scanning and charting the conditions where a variety of spatial regimes are superimposed. With this form of architectural experimentation, the BT studio tried to answer whether these encountered spatial conditions can still be the starting point of an architectural design intervention proposal. Can one attempt to consider some kind of concreteness in this current period of distant locality where space and proximity have been redefined? The investigation has shown that the post-socialist era in Belgrade has resulted in a rather radical rewriting of the urban fabric. While it is true that our globalized world has insisted on the emergence of a borderless world, the insight has grown that borders are not as obsolete as anticipated, quite the contrary. Border regimes have only increased in the era of globalization, and this process has seemingly not ended, far from it. This distance gaze revealed other aspects of Belgrade as well, insights that particularly emerged because of our more distant, observant interpretation of the city. Even as not informed, or rather remotely informed readers of Belgrade, who had almost no instruments or tools to confirm, resist, challenge, critique, or verify our readings, we had the opportunity to introduce the engaged look of an outsider to reflect on the current state of affairs in Belgrade. The overall results of the studio were quite telling, as some examples can attest. For the project developed by Olga Gumienna, a collective strategy towards the establishment of permanent autonomous zones of non-activity in Belgrade was developed and argued for, which ultimately resulted in a project that combines an art center with a demolition park. In this project, the careful mapping of the ruins of the former aqua park has resulted in an architectural project in which the violation of space is proactively transformed into creative act. Sofia Pavlova proposed a similar autonomous zone and developed a project for a non-community center. Through an experimental design process with sections, an architecture of the wall has emerged in which a delicate play of excavations, voids, and solids is constituting a space both intimate and uncanny. Finally, Julia Linde traced a sequence of boundary conditions in Belgrade, which, in her proposal, start to weave a network of public spaces. The speciality of these architectural structures, combined with their specific materialities, is intended to not only frame the boundary conditions in this part of Belgrade, but to simultaneously ground them in their specific contexts.
Naturally, it must be acknowledged that new technologies alter our perception and conceptualization of reality, as well as our knowledge and our social interactions. The more conventional type of field trip has a particular setup with respect to the underlying sets of information regarding explored spatial conditions. For instance, with respect to historical urban developments, demographics, political decision-making processes, rules and laws, and even urban narratives and myths. They will either be studied a priori or will only be present remotely during the field trip. There is therefore an indirect and not ideal relationship between primary and secondary sources of information during the field trip. Though photogrammetric documentation of sites is nowadays easily accessible, the problem with these distance gazes remains the difficulty of making such remotely detected spatial and material conditions tangible and insightful for architectural interventions or intervention proposals. In general, contemporary VR tools are already allowing for immersed spatial explorations, but they have hardly been implemented in creating smart learning environments. Recognizing these new developments, but also acknowledging the limitations of available tools, the Borders and Territories Group is currently developing the DRIFT project, which intends to implement these VR-based remote sensing operations, but also to expand upon these VR-immersed possibilities by enhancing the visualization of geospatial data, as well as to incorporate other relevant data sets in creating digitally assembled landscapes for smart learning. Its innovative character will be situated in bringing several digital tools together in one research framework, as well as rendering is operational for design thinking in a smart learning environment. As it currently stands, and as we have seen and proven in our Belgrade studio, in situ investigations in educational settings can nowadays easily be made from a distance and online, and thus become in virtual situ. These more recent developments in VR technologies have opened quite a number of intriguing options for the scientific and design disciplines in general, and in architecture and architectural education in specific. We thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much.